One thing is to create a work of art that contains single or few original and interesting ideas. This already represents an incredible effort in itself. However, to create a work that radiates such an enormous amount of absolutely on-point ideas, from each angle that you can look at it, it's a rare and precious phenomenon. Such an extraordinary piece is the three-body problem series, officially named Remembrance of Earth's Past, by Chinese author Liu Cixin. I failed to find the right words to convey the significance of this literary work and how it struck me. I am quite accustomed to being surprised by clever ideas, yet even the purest and most genius ideas often provoke in me an underwhelming external response. I quietly say, interesting, and after that I delve into a silent contemplation. However, a few years back, this series plunged me into 3 weeks of absolute madness. All the time I had, and even the time I didn't have, I invested it all in reading or thinking about what I had just read. I survived only the bare minimum of sleep, and my work productivity surely suffered. And today, with the coming show done by the same people responsible for Game of Thrones, I want to return to this masterpiece and focus on what examples of genius can be drawn from it. The goal I have in mind is to identify the pillars that led me to be absolutely swept away by the content of the books. Naturally, the following essay will contain spoilers, but I will not be focusing on the specific plot or the content, but rather on an abstract interpretation of the work, adorned with some examples from the books. So, within the upcoming show, you can witness my descent into mania while trying to grasp the incredible enlightened quality of the three-body problem series. Welcome to Magne Mirare. I would first like to focus on the author himself, with perhaps the most direct route being an interview from 2020, which you can find on JSTOR, link in the description. Liu Cixin is a Chinese science fiction writer, but also a computer engineer, which is something that is reflected very much in his own work, as the next chapter will show. Among his sources of inspirations are Russian authors, especially Tolstoy, and of course sci-fi classics like Sir Arthur Charles Clarke and his 2001 Space Odyssey. Liu Cixin, as he himself says, finds grand narratives immensely powerful and captivating. This can certainly be seen in his books. His characters are seamlessly weaved into this immense tapestry of almost incomprehensible scale. This tapestry being the grand march of history and society through a very well-crafted macro-historical and geopolitical perspective of anthropology. And only in the moments of absolute culmination are the main characters able to change this incredible flow through sheer force of will condensed in one great act. Liu Cixin has an incredible gift for portraying the universe as a series of generalized patterns of a great mosaic monument. But at the same time, he is able to leave room in the midst of this monument for human will, human expression, which, despite all of its insignificance and smallness, has the potential to intervene at the right time in the right place. In a way, this is a depiction of apotheosis, a meeting of the macrocosm and the microcosm, a moment when something small is capable of changing the entire universe. The author defines himself rather shortly as an atheist. To what extent this is a diplomatic response of a member of Chinese society and to what extent this is truly his own conviction, of course, cannot be determined, and I don't think it really matters. You know, I've seen the word atheist thrown in many contexts. For some, this is simply rejection of deities, rarely with any understanding what deities mean anthropologically. Other times, it means rejection of supernatural and spiritual in general. That would be the way I use it. Nevertheless, the author is fully entitled to identify himself in this way, whatever it means for him. But what is definitely worth mentioning is that the type of ideas he puts into his writing are exactly the ones that lead me to identify as spiritual. All this simply relates to some personal definitions. However, Liu Cixin describes very interestingly his opinions on philosophy. According to him, science has a somewhat limited relationship to the world, in that it is ultimately capable of depicting a rather static picture of the world, while philosophy, through its fluidity, is capable of mediating creativity. Philosophy is able to depict many angles of view of the world, which is something I continuously advocate in my evaluation of the relationship between science and spirituality in my previous videos. And so, I dare to say that, to some extent, I see a certain relationship between what the author calls philosophy and what I call spirituality. In a sense, we both somehow point in the same direction, but from a slightly different cultural standpoint. Which is good. We achieve triangulation. And the author actually mentions a relevant comparison of different cultural standpoints when presenting his analysis of the difference between Western and Eastern reader. From his point of view, what the Eastern reader needs is to start on realistic foundations, surrounded by factual human experience and history. This is manifested, for example, by the fact that the whole series begins within a context of the Chinese Cultural Revolution, something the author himself experienced. From these realistic foundations, the story gradually, step by step, moves into incredibly transcendent ideas. One is so surprised that he does not even know how he ended up at the other end of the universe. However, I'm not sure to what extent this is necessarily a cultural observation of the difference between East and the West. After all, his work seems to be generally captivating and has become a global phenomenon. So I would rather suggest that this is a broadly useful method, which may bear some specific closeness to the Eastern mentality, but it certainly seems overshadowed by the closeness to the general human nature. Where I would much rather target this dichotomy is precisely in the difference between the aforementioned philosophical realism and certain spiritual idealism. It is simply easier for the humanity to work its way into the heavenly heights of abstraction with slow and sure steps from some solid starting point, rather than to learn to descend from the heavenly heights like a parachutist. Personally, I feel fairly embedded in abstraction. It is a homely environment to me, but I also had to originally come from realistic groundedness, which slowly but surely brings us to the topic of methods, abstractions, and generalizations the author employs in the construction of his work. These are the methods he, as a philosopher, uses to build a ladder to the heavens, which I perceive as spiritual understanding of the universe. It should be noted that the author himself does not make such deep analysis of his own work. For him, the main thing is to convey an interesting story, and that is of course naturally shaped by the personal intuition of the author himself, and deeper analysis and meanings are extracted from it later by readers. And I actually think this is the essence of art. Anyway, keep this in mind, because the following analysis cannot but completely originate from my own lenses, perceptions, and instincts. One of the fundamental characteristics of successful system thinking is understanding of the scale-free nature of patterns and their behaviors. In its simplest form, this means that mathematics behaves the same when we add two atoms and when we add two galaxies. The answer is always 2. However, this becomes much more important when we consider more complicated patterns. In the first book, we encounter a beautiful demonstration of this principle in chapter 17. Without delving into the precise reasoning or setting, the involved characters decide to build a functional computer within this chapter. However, instead of using electronic circuitry, they use individuals, repurposed soldiers of a grand army. Each of these soldiers serves as a small logic gate, in a similar way as transistors. In this monumental structure, none of these soldiers need to know the content of the calculation or the whole problem itself. They just need to perform their small logical task to produce the final result. Individual units play the role of memory blocks, CPU, and so on. The system bus responsible for transferring information between specific blocks is represented by a light cavalry, and during the subsequent testing of the system's boot, the entire army experiences a system crash due to a bug in the CPU section. This idea is surprisingly not so unique. On similar principles, a certain player built a functional calculator in the cult classic Dwarf Fortress. This one was operated through water channels, floodgates, and drunken bearded maniacs. Also, as the pinnacle of human genius combined with madness, someone managed to build a functional computer model in the game Factorio, on which it is possible to play a Wolfenstein-like first-person shooter. For our universe, it is typical that patterns, no matter how complex, can be implemented on any scale. Natural patterns of our universe repeat at intervals when one zooms in or out. In this way, we can look at, for example, the pattern of tree branching, which we can see in the neurons, veins, trees, mycelium. However, this applies not only to so-called living organisms, but also to the distribution of mineral deposits, or the behavior of pure electrical force itself. And, on its largest scale, if one looks at the cosmic web, the galactic filaments, he openly sees that it is the same shape as the one formed by mycelium or perhaps the infrastructures of human civilization. In short, Liu Cixin is very aware of the transferability of patterns. And this is manifested both in our universe and in these books, even at the level of abstraction. Patterns of behavior or ideas are transferable to a larger scale. This is essentially the principle of generalization. The most significant example of this is actually the eponymous theme of the entire second book, The Dark Forest. The main character, Luo Ji, devotes himself to the newly emerging field of cosmic sociology, its structure being based on two input axioms. First, survival is the primary need of every civilization. And second, civilizations are constantly evolving and spreading, but the total mass in the universe remains constant. Deriving consequences from these two axioms is essentially the most important content of the second book's story arc of the character Luo Ji. And the resulting answer lies in transferring smaller human patterns of behavior into the expanded scale of the incredible universe itself. On the top of the two aforementioned axioms, two other important concepts are added: technological explosion and the chain of suspicion. Technological explosion is the idea that development of science and technology behaves exponentially. When a civilization begins to make scientific advances, godlike understanding is actually within close reach. With each subsequent discovery, the whole process just accelerates. And for that reason, even a primitive civilization can theoretically be only few insignificant centuries from unimaginable power. And with regard to the aforementioned axioms, this means that regardless of how insignificant a civilization is, it is inherently a threat to even the most powerful celestial empires. And thus, we enter the chain of suspicion. From basic evolutionary and factual principles, it is not possible to trust any other civilization in the universe. No one can trust anyone, and there is not much hope that this could change. Especially because communicating in the universe means communicating publicly. Out of the thousands of silent listeners, it suffices for only one to be paranoid and militant. Such aggressive society simply annihilates anyone who dares to be known, so that they eliminate the danger posed to the fragile balance of the universe. And thus arises the hypothesis of the dark forest, where there is plenty of life, but no one can speak out loud or establish communication with anyone else. The reason I am talking about this is that the way Liu Cixin constructs one of the main themes of his trilogy, the hypothesis of the dark forest, is the same way he uses to construct the idea of building a computer from human beings who manually perform the tasks of electronic circuits. And perhaps I am amazed by something that may seem completely banal. It is simply the process of generalization and pattern recognition, something that we know deeply pervades our entire existence. But I think that essentially these, on first glance, simple concepts hide miraculous characteristics of our universe. And these are the scale-free nature of patterns and the closely related self-similarity. With these attributes, our universe begins to resemble a fractal, if it doesn't actually become one outright. The specific definition of a fractal is elusive, and the whole matter remains unresolved. However, fundamentally, I believe that for human thought, art, science, and any other human endeavor, it is immensely fruitful to think about the world around us as about a fractal. Indeed, that is why so many traditional ethnic ornaments incorporate fractals. When we encounter emergent behavior at some level of scale, for example in how computer does its computation, this pattern is entirely transferable to other magnitudes. All emergent behavior is transferable to a different scale, a different size. Not only that, there is a great likelihood that from the essence of the universe itself, emergent behavior is already present at various dimensional levels. In one of the previous videos, I talked about my panpsychist or pantheistic perception of the world. For me, consciousness is an omnipresent phenomenon. And one commentator insisted that consciousness is an emergent phenomenon of specifically organic biology. Well, if the pattern of organic biology forms the emergent consciousness, I still see no escape from the scale-free transferability of said consciousness. In analogous formations and patterns, regardless of scale, analogous emergencies occur. If one learns to perceive the world as a system of fractals, then he learns to perceive it holistically. And with this holistic perception, he can create generalizations, analogies, and discover new connections. To quote one of the most amazing human beings who ever lived, Leonardo da Vinci, "These are the principles for the development of complete mind. Study the science of art, study the art of science. Realize that everything connects to everything else." I have now spent some time talking about the patterns and their ubiquity. Patterns are essentially a representation of the underlying order of the universe. They are definitely one of the strong reasons why the idea of the clockwork universe has been and still is very popular. That is, a causal universe that behaves like an already moving billiard game, where everything just continues in a very mechanical way forward. This is certainly part of the nature of the universe, but the greatest advances in the fields of physics and mathematics of the 20th century undermine this view of the universe. And I perceive this type of conflict, the duality between determinism and voluntarism, as one of the motifs that permeates the entire series of books. The title of the first book, The Three-Body Problem, refers to the eponymous problem of Newtonian physics, and in more concrete terms, astronomy. If we have two bodies in one system that interact with each other, and we know their mass and their velocity, then it is possible to predict the long-term development through the existence of a so-called closed-form solution. This means that we are able to, theoretically, construct one closed approach that predicts the behavior of such system in the long term. After all, such a system very easily achieves a stable, regular, cyclical character. Those bodies simply orbit each other and will continue to orbit. But just one additional body completely changes the situation. The overwhelming majority of combinations of three bodies lead to an absolutely chaotic state. There is no clear rhyme or reason to the patterns one encounters. Predicting the behavior of chaotic system would require absolutely precise knowledge of all variables, because even the slightest change of the initial conditions leads to significant difference down the road. This is called the butterfly effect. In an attempt to predict a chaotic system, there is no wiggle room for error. As a result, every atom counts. In a chaotic system, areas of order, clear periodic behavior, or stability are small isolated islands surrounded by a huge ocean of unpredictability. In this series of books, it is often precisely the unpredictability of chaos that forces characters to act. The vast majority of the books revolve around a conflict between humans and the race of so-called trisolarans. The trisolaran species is cursed by having evolved on a planet trapped in a 3-star system. Orbits are unpredictable, and the planet itself is doomed to destruction in the long run. It is precisely chaos that is the prime mover of events in the books. The trisolarans are driven by an evolutionary desire to survive, which in their case means they necessarily need to find a new home. And so the trisolaran fleet sets out toward Earth, and its journey will take over 4 centuries, which is an information that humanity gains and is suddenly exposed to the reality of a conflict that will occur, although none of the generations living at the time will encounter it. On top of that, thanks to their technologies, the trisolarans have 2 huge advantages in their conflict with humanity. They have a direct, real-time view of everything that happens or is said on Earth, so they are informationally omnipresent. And, second, they have a free hand in subtle manipulation of subatomic particles on Earth. In their attempt to defeat humanity, before it technologically advances to a too sophisticated form, the trisolarans continuously sabotage quantum research. All data obtained from particle accelerators or similar experiments are shrouded in chaotic noise of chance, which prevents the exploration of deeper quantum essence of our universe. This is again another occurrence of chaos, which forces a response from the protagonists, a response formulated through sheer personal will. When the path becomes unpredictable, and it is not possible to proceed in a rational mechanical way, humanity must resort to the only weapon it has left, the inner creative chaos of few chosen individuals. 4 so-called wall-facers are chosen for the task of finding a solution to humanity's hopeless situation. And they have to do so in a way that is not obvious, that is not externally recognizable. It has to be incomprehensible both to humanity itself and to its trisolaran rivals, who, due to their technologies, know everything that people say or do. The only thing they are unable to reach are the depths of human soul. They cannot see through masks of our persona into the labyrinth of human psyche. These individuals, the wall-facers, symbolize human creative will. Will that is literally called to action by the chaos of the universe. This is a symbolic victory of voluntarism over determinism. People respond with intuition and heart to the problem of the 3 bodies. Of course, intuition-led behavior is often mistaken and misguided. 3 of the aforementioned wall-facers completely fail in their task, and even the 4th, our protagonist Luoji, is only able to achieve temporary success. However, this reveals another aspect of voluntarism. As the failure of most wall-facers shows us, voluntarism has a chance of success only when understood in evolutionary lenses. That is, only if multiple wills simultaneously try out different strategies. Most of them will fail, and such is their historical role, to serve as an example of where the blind paths are. And those that succeed do not possess a universal solution. They are just another step on the path of survival. Evolution is a feature of voluntarism. This again can be seen in what humanity gains with the success of the 4th wall-facer. There is no permanent security here, no permanent stability, no promise of infinite peace. Humanity gains limited time to increase its slim chances of long-term survival. Few individuals are enough for the will of humanity to survive in the depths of the cosmos. From this perspective, it is very peculiar to encounter the final book in the series, Death's End, and specifically the main protagonist, Cixin. She is a representation of the soft human heart, emotion, and love. She seems incredibly fragile and represents the innocence of humanity. Humanity that believes that short-term peace is eternal and that it can relax in its vigilance. Cixin is chosen to succeed Luo Ji as essentially the fourth wall-facer, but through her innocence, she continuously makes wrong decisions. Decisions that in the long run lead to the ruin of humanity. Even the will is not infallible, especially when it is a blind and innocent one. In a general sense, I am of the opinion that it is precisely quantum physics and above all the theory of chaos that has shattered our initial primitive notions of deterministic universe. Chaotic systems behave in a way that does not allow for the creation of a simple equation describing their development. Therefore, to find out what their next step will be, their immediate development, you would need to know with absolute precision every single variable in the system exactly in the state in which it currently is. From the perspective of the universe, this is not possible, because for an absolutely precise representation of the entire universe, you need, well, the entire universe. And the entire universe already does its calculation. And it is doing it at the pace at which time itself runs, the pace at which its causality is limited, the speed of light. In a way, the universe very well may be deterministic, but at the same time, the entirety of the universe needs to happen to essentially do such determination in real time. The calculation cannot be made in advance. We live it with every step. And the only answer we can have is to submit to the unattainability of its magnitude and try, each with our own will, to act, and evolutionarily count on the fact that most of us will fail. It's not about us as individuals winning, but about at least someone surviving. As I mentioned in the previous chapter, the author, Liu Cixin, identifies as an atheist. However, that doesn't change the fact that his entire work exudes an atmosphere of spiritual understanding. This is, of course, influenced by my personal experience and approach to spirituality. But I feel a tremendous opportunity here to show why I believe this piece of art transcends the boundaries of materialistic understanding of a godless universe. In the second book, The Dark Forest, there is a beautiful passage that is obviously not only the author's perception, but also a personal experience and, to some extent, I believe, a confession. The character of the fourth wall-facer, Luo Ji, encounters what it means to be a literary author. He gradually becomes aware that a character of a girl he is creating in his head is not lifeless, but actually occupies a part of his brain. She borrows his computational capacity to realize her own existence. She is endowed with her own life, will, and desires. And Luo Ji emotionally falls for her more than he could ever fall for any real person. What the author carries in his head is more real to him than the external reality itself. To quote directly from the book, "I used to think that a character in a novel was controlled by her creator, that she would be whatever the author wanted her to be, and do whatever the author wanted her to do, like God does for us. Wrong. Now you realize you were wrong. This is the difference between an ordinary scribe and a literary writer. The highest level of a literary creation is when the characters in a novel possess life in the mind of the writer. The writer is unable to control them. and might not even be able to predict the next action they will take. We can only follow them in wonder, to observe and record the minute details of their lives, like a voyeur. That's how a classic is made. I think this is an incredibly valuable interpretation of the relationship between creation and divinity. Instead of a clear hierarchical creator who assembles a predictable mechanical contraption, the author, God, becomes someone who is controlled by his own creation. He breathes life into it, yes, but then he takes it into his heart and finally succumbs to it. And nothing has ever seemed as real to him as this complex idea he constructed within himself. I've already spoken about something similar in a previous video while analyzing A Song of Ice and Fire. An author creating any work of art does so out of the instinctual desire to reach divinity, to create, breathe life, and find out what kind of relationship he has with his own creation. The product of such process is subsequently fascination, the great awe that takes one's breath away and makes him humble before his own thoughts. The same awe evokes in us the endeavor of exploring the universe. It's the same type of emotion really we feel in such situation. Both reaching for the divine creation through one's own authorial work and exploration of this creation through science belong to the same category. It is an attempt to create and understand an immensely personal relationship between the individual and the universe itself. In the first book, in chapter 16, we encounter the story of a brilliant mathematician, Wei Cheng. During his life, he burnt out from the mundane academic career and went to search for inner peace and tranquility in a Buddhist monastery in southern China. Here he engages in debates with the local abbot about how he should settle his life and gradually realizes he himself, a scientist and mathematician, finds the abbot's positions not to be misguided at all. On the contrary, he realizes that under the guise of what he expected to be a Buddhist philosophy, there is actually an agreement with modern physical theories. Under the guidance of this abbot, he undergoes mental exercise of conceptualization of existential emptiness, such emptiness that leads one to think about how something can arise from nothing. Through this mental process, he gradually fills this imaginary emptiness first with one object, a perfect, solid sphere, devoid of any life. Then he imagines a second sphere, and realizes that even in the orbital movement, these two spheres are merely symbols of death, again, devoid of any life. And finally, he imagines the third one. And from the chaos of the turbulence of the three-body problem, suddenly arises an awareness of life and will. Liu Cixin is a master of intertwining philosophy and science, spiritual and material. Liu Cixin, whether he knows it or not, is a mystic. There is perhaps no better place to see this than in the way he ultimately conceptualizes the entire universe and its functioning in his series. In the books, our three-dimensional universe is merely the decaying body of the original state of the universe. Our universe undergoes a state of gradual decomposition of dimensions, and the limitations of the speed of light, the pace of causality, is a consequence of this degradation. Before the current state of the three-dimensional universe, there existed a fuller four-dimensional space with a higher speed of light. What happened to it? The decomposition of the universe into lower dimensions is one of the basic technologies of conducting war in the dark forest. Our own universe is heading towards decomposition into two dimensions. The four-dimensional universe, from which only small puddles remain, was also just a mere reflection of the original perfect universe. That one had 10 dimensions. Our brains don't even possess the ability to imagine the perfect, complete, mandalic beauty of the original universe, where light traveled instantaneously, without practical limitations. In the last book, this original state of the universe is referred to as the period or the Garden of Eden, the period of divine perfection. It's precisely this embedding of divinity into the lost perfection of singularity of our own cosmology that makes Liu Cixin a mystic, a man connecting scientific knowledge with shamanic dreaming. However he chooses to self-identify, be it an atheist, philosopher, or whatever, the way he imprints his perspective on the universe and authorship into the character of Luo Ji, as described in the previous chapter, indicates that the author's creation is more real to him than reality itself. It is real to him because it resides in his mind and heart. For this reason, I believe that the vision of the universe presented by Cixin is not merely an interesting idea. I think that at its core lies Liu Cixin's personal attempt to describe his own understanding of our own universe. Of course, the specific imaginative concepts, such as the number of dimensions, the behavior of the speed of light, etc., all of them are author-specific interpretations. This is of course not a scientific text. This is a science fiction. But the underlying structure of the author's perception of the universe seems to transcend the boundaries of his book. It represents a genuine spiritual, or in the author's word, philosophical expression. This is an extremely rare ability of connecting the spiritual, the awe of the miracle of our own existence, with its actual material manifestation. The story begins in the reality of the Chinese Cultural Revolution, and it ends with the breathtaking vision of the universe, one which is the fulfillment of humanity's deepest desire for divinity. After all, the author's ideas of the nature of our universe are in perfect harmony with such ancient traditions as is the Kabbalah. This type of mysticism has been with us for a long time. Liu Cixin built a ladder to the heavens, not unlike Jacob's ladder. With the proud knowledge of computer engineer, he took the fractal characteristics of our universe, and through the use of its scale-free nature, built one step of the ladder after another. Our desire to read is similar to the character's own motivation to act. The reader is exposed to the chaos of unpredictability, and thus he is forced to become an actor of will, trying to break free from the shackles of determinism through the process of reading. He searches for meaning, step by step, page by page, desiring an understanding, desiring a resolution. And, in the end, he allows himself to be engulfed in the author's creation, which comes to life in his head, just as it must have lived in the head of the author himself. In conclusion, this ladder leads him face to face with the divinity of our very universe. It brings us to the feeling that somewhere, sometime, there existed a perfect, geometrically richer universe. A universe not bound by the laws of finite causality. A universe that was a Garden of Eden, an image of true divinity, in whose mere faint reflection we survive today. And we dream of it, feeling an incomprehensible emotion, stronger than love. We feel the great awe.